We now go to the Windsor, Detroit area where an alien craft has just landed.
I want you men to surround the craft. Chris, you stay with me.
What are we going to do, Jeff?
We're going in.
What? They're extraterrestrials.
What are you doing here? Why have you come here?
We have come here to listen to 99.1 FM CJAM.
99.1 FM CJAM, redefining radio in Windsor and Detroit.
It's time for You Talking to Me with your host, Big JD.
Nutritionist Jane Ibbetson joins us today to talk about smart eating made simple. She'll expose what the food industry has been hiding for years, tell us what's really in those burgers you're eating, and share ways we can start feeling better by making wiser food choices. Jane, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about eating habits, smart eating, and feeling good from the foods we eat, or at least we should be eating, but maybe you can fill us in a little bit on your background. You have a master's in nutrition.
Yes, I do. And I worked as a nutritionist for the WIC program here in Arizona.
And I know
I've done a lot of training for the employees in the WIC program on nutrition.
And I know that, you've been an educator. And does your current view on nutrition differ from what you learned in college, say?
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. You know, back in those days, in the 60s, when I was in college, Wesson Oil, Miracle Whip, and Crisco shortening was the thing. That was America's favorites.
I remember that stuff as a kid.
Yeah. If you go into someone's kitchen now, what do you see? Olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then as far as research back in the college days, I was mainly on physical activity and the consumption of fats, like saturated fats. And in fact, the nutritionists and the researchers at that time were encouraging polyunsaturated oils to reduce heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all changing.
Wow.
Now, you know, research is putting emphasis on cutting refined sugars and carbohydrates.
Sure. Yeah. It was. It seemed like back then, at that time, research on these kinds of things and food and healthy eating was a lot more basic, and now it's gotten a lot more complex, I would say. But you help to make it a little bit more simple and understandable. I want to ask you, been a counselor for high risk families. Are we talking illness like heart disease, diabetes, and things of that nature?
Well, it was mainly just whatever their risk was for being on the program.
Okay.
Then I would talk to the parent about that. Whether it was if a child was overweight, what can we do to help normalize the weight, you know, and that type of thing.
Now, can food heal disease or reverse the effects of some diseases?
Sure. I like to think back in the days, you know, of food chemists, a long time ago, people had a close relationship with food that they ate. And plants often served as food and medicine at the same time. I think it was Napoleon that said, let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food. Mm-hmm. Something to that effect. And so an example of this would be like the tiny caraway seed. You know, Germans, they like to cook a lot of cabbage. And so the cabbage can be rather harsh on the digestive system. But, you know, if you put a little caraway seed in it, it helps to mellow the discomforting effect of the kraut on the digestive tract.
Oh,
so that's one example. And then, you know, plants can just fuel the body with the right quantity and quality of potent nutrition. And it promotes the well-being and the healing of the body. You know, the other day I was online and reading about this guy that had pancreatic cancer, if I can get that word out. But anyway, he ate coleslaw every day, healing himself of the cancer. I thought, wow, that's really different. I'm sure the coleslaw was not smothered in dressing, though. But
Right.
but yes, cabbage is a good cruciferous vegetable that helps pull toxins from the body, and it gives antioxidants for the body along with healthy bacteria for the digestive tract.
And there's
And I have another example I want to tell you.
sure.
Too, but go ahead.
Oh, I was
You
just
had a
going to say
question.
there are medical reports linking food and disease prevention. So,
Yes. Another real-life example, I was reading in a book by this German, a German biochemist and researcher, and her name was Dr. Budwig, and she was nominated for the Nobel Prize 7 times. And she told this story of a mother who had come to her with her 2 children, and I think the children were like 12 and 14 years of age. The children were very overfed, with the boy being obese and the girl having an unhealthy appearance. The mother complained to Dr. Budwig about her children's bad behavior, and Dr. Budwig said she felt for her, and she laid the blame on the food the lady prepared for her children. But of course, this woman, she denied it, and her daughter wouldn't obey her and or behave in a friendly manner to her mom at all. And so after a long discussion of, other topics, Dr. Budwig said her farewells and turned to go, and then this little girl, she slipped through a side door, inquiring in a whisper, "What's the name of the medicine I can take to make me a good girl? Can you give me some?" And Dr. Budwig, she gave her the mixture of flaxseed and honey, which is rich in the highly unsaturated fats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. Budwig said that, not all moral behavior problems can be solved by means of eating these fats and oils, but she assures us that the effects on our society of a normalization of fats in our nutrition is really tremendous.
And what's the importance of eating enough vegetables every day? Do we need to eat a certain amount to benefit from the nutrition that we get from vegetables?
Well, I think so. Vegetables, they fit our body just better than any other food group. In fact, I like to think that vegetables fit us like our socks do, so to speak.
Oh, wow.
They contain a lot of nutrients like the vitamins and the minerals and the fiber, and they provide color and flavor and aroma. And I especially like to think of the cruciferous vegetables like kale and broccoli and cabbage, cauliflower, collard greens, radishes. And, all of those cruciferous vegetables contain a lot of sulfur, and they're very cleansing to the body. And another thing about vegetables is that they're very low in calories. Like a cup of vegetables is about 50 calories. And, of course, that wouldn't apply to vegetables that are batter-coated or loaded with cheese or those that are fried. It's just the plain vegetables,
Right. And how fast can veggies change our health and how we feel? Does it happen quickly?
Well, it depends on a person's state of health, I think. How badly our body may be embedded with toxins, and it depends on the person and the stress how much stress they're going through, or how much exercise they're getting, how much rest they're getting. Mm-hmm. It even depends on the quality of air that they're breathing. Like if they're living in L.A. as compared to out in the country, that's a big difference. And then, of course, a person's age, an older person may take longer. It depends on whether a person smokes, drinks, or if they're on a lot of medications. Also, the type of vegetables a person eats. For example, I talk to some people and they say, "Well, I eat a lot of vegetables." Well, if a person only eats green beans, corn, and potatoes every day, that doesn't really count. we need to eat the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and collard greens and cabbage and all of those that I mentioned before. And it depends on how much a person eats of these vegetables. Like, is the plate half full of vegetables and with just a little bit of meat, or do you just have say a tablespoon of vegetables? It makes a big difference. Now, for me, and when I was writing my book, Smart Eating Made Simple, and I was telling my story, it took me only 21 days to feel 80% better. The other 20% happened over like several years.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a continual thing to eat correctly after you have an illness.
Would you say there's a couple of the healthiest vegetables that we should have in our diet? I know you mentioned the cruciferous ones, their importance. Are they very different from each other, or are there some that have more nutrients than other vegetables, a wider range?
Well, yeah, I guess they're all great, but there are some dark leafy green vegetables like Swiss chard and kale that contain like 20 plus nutrients, which is really a plus. I mean, they're loaded. You know?
That's a lot. That's like a multivitamin right there.
Right, exactly.
Now, how about the pros and cons of becoming a vegan? I want to ask you about this. Is it okay to never eat meat?
Well, I think many foods make up a vegan diet, like the genetically modified soy and corn, which are detrimental to our health. And, vegans, they avoid animal products. So if a person eliminates a food group from your diet, then we usually have to replace it with something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in many cases, it's sugar and carbs that we replace, and that's correlated with cancer. So from a clinical point of view, I believe virtually everyone benefits from some animal protein. It doesn't have to be meat necessarily, as there are other healthy animal products like raw organic dairy and organic free-range eggs.
Right.
And then there's the argument that eating meat ruins the environment, referring to meat coming from feedlots, not the meat raised, naturally on grass. So in terms of sustainability and saving the world, the real battle that needs to be fought is not one of meat eaters versus vegans. It's one of agriculture as an industry versus agriculture the way nature intended.
In that, maybe you can offer a tip of how to get even a hardcore carnivore to try more plant-based foods. How do you entice them?
Well, that's a good question. Some people don't like beans, or at least they don't like to eat them very often. And, of course, beans come from plants. I just tell them to cook a pot of garbanzo beans and make some hummus, because everybody likes hummus. In fact, I have a delicious recipe in my book, Smart Eating Made Simple, on how to make hummus. It's a nice dip. And another thing you can make is pesto. And you can put pesto on pasta, or you can serve it with corn on the cob. And pesto is usually made with basil or cilantro, and it's very cleansing to the body, and it supplies a healthy fat for the body. Another recipe that I have in my book is a sweet chili sauce. And this recipe was given to me by a Chinese friend. The sauce can be used on any vegetable. And, in fact, if a child or anyone, for that matter, doesn't like a vegetable, you just give them a little bit of this sauce on their vegetable, and they'll love it. The key is to keep trying a new recipe until you find one that you really like, because there's a lot of good veggies out there, and you just have to keep working at it.
Right, and there's a lot of good recipes as well, and you have lots in your book, and we'll get more into your book a little bit later in the show. You talked about healthy fats a number of times. What's the difference between omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids and their importance in our diet? Okay,
well, they're both essential for the body, which means we need to get them in our food. Omega-6s are found in processed foods, especially those foods that contain vegetable oils such as corn, soybeans, safflower, canola. And then also omega-6s are found in meats and chicken. So, and then omega-3s are found in flaxseed, leafy greens, and the fatty fish such as salmon, sardines, tuna, and herring. So, let me explain a good way to remember the omega-6s and the omega-3s. The omega-6s come from grains and seeds, and the omega-3s from the leafy greens. So, if you eat a fish, then what does that fish eat? It eats the algae from the sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so they would be high in omega-3s. Now, if you have, say, a cow or a steer that's raised in the feedlot, they're given grains and seeds like corn and soybeans. So their meat is going to be higher in omega-6s. So maybe that helps to explain how a good way to remember the difference. And it's the ratio that we need to really be concerned about. The standard American diet, the ratio has been about 20-1 of omega-6 to omega-3s. So, but we need to get that down to like 2-1, which is quite a difference. Omega-6 fatty acids are thought to be inflammatory, which leads to chronic diseases, whereas the omega-3s are the healers.
And
so I hope that explains it.
Yeah, it definitely does. And in talking about these things and needing to know ratios and things like that and choosing the right foods, how do we manage, maybe you can shed some light on how to manage, better manage time to eat healthy?
Well, you know, that is a problem with a lot of people that are working nowadays. They say, oh, I just don't have time to eat healthy, and so they give up on it. But for me, I just plan my work and work my plan and just do the best I can. Like on the weekends, I do a lot of cooking. I cook brown rice, and I cook a pot of beans maybe, and I freeze them in batches to use during the week. Most importantly, my husband and I, we go to the store and we buy a lot of vegetables. And when we get home, we wash them up, we chop them, and we bag them. And that way they're all ready for steaming or stir-frying or whatever we decide to do with them. So that's how we do it.
Good advice. Plan your work and work your plan.
Right.
So let's talk about a little bit about the toxicity of food. You mentioned that, especially processed foods.
Yes. Processed foods are dangerous. The presence of toxic chemicals in our environment and our bodies is the most serious threat in our society today. At least I believe it is. I was reading the other day that the average American consumes 10 pounds of chemical food additives per year.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? These chemical additives include like food flavors, colors, preservatives, hormones, antibiotics, sweeteners, just to name a few.
Are a lot of these on the labeling, or are some of these sound like they're hidden? I mean, it's not going to say antibiotics on a label.
Well, yeah, they can hide things behind food flavors, but most everything is listed on the label. It has to be.
Okay.
And, you know, almost 90% of the money we spend on food is going to buy processed food. Our food supply is more geared to convenience nowadays.
Sure.
And it's for profit for the food companies.
Right, and it fits right in with what we were talking about, managing time to eat healthy. You have to find some ways to plan your work and work your plan.
Right.
I think something that turns people off of vegetables and a lot of times is they think the majority of them need to be eaten raw, but there must be so many recipes with cooked vegetables, and we'll get into more of this as well, but there must be some guidelines to make sure you don't cook away their nutrients. That's
true. In fact, you know, the microwave is the worst thing that we can use. I mean, it really zaps the food. And I like to, from my research, I've found that steaming is really the best way to go to preserve the nutrients. And yes, a few raw vegetables are very good for the body because they contain enzymes that are healthy for the digestive tract. And so if you eat the raw vegetables, you're getting those enzymes. But I'm not saying go totally raw because that's kind of way out too. But cooked vegetables are delicious and nutritious, but they just need to be cooked for a short period of time.
And isn't it true, that some of these nutrients are brought out in a cooking process, especially if they're not cooked that long, only to a certain point that they need to be?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And we're going to take a break. After the break, Jane exposes what the food industry has been hiding for years, deadly additives and more coming right up.
Do you have an interesting career? You have an interesting life experience to share with others. If you'd like to be a guest on You Talking to Me, contact me, Big JD, at the You Talking to Me website. That's youtalkingtome.ca. The letter U, talking, the number 2, me, youtalkingtome.ca.
We're back. This is You Talking to Me. I'm Big JD. I'm talking to nutritionist Jane Ibbetson about Smart Eating Made Simple, which is also the title of her new book. So, Jane, what's the food industry been hiding all these years?
Well, they've been hiding a lot. For example, I think it was just yesterday that someone was saying on Twitter, giving reference to the Food and Drug Administration, just ruling that the meat industry is to stop giving antibiotics to animals to make them gain weight. Another note worth mentioning is the fact that half of all the antibiotics given in this country goes to animals. So if that happens and we're eating the meat from those animals, what are we getting?
Right.
We're getting those antibiotics. The only drawback that I see about this FDA ruling is that they're giving the meat industry 5 years to stop giving these antibiotics, and this is way too long. So
Now, are these the things that you talk about that are really in the burgers we're eating, or is there more?
oh, there's more.
Uh-oh.
The cattle in the feedlots are fed genetically modified corn and soybean meal. So if the cow or the steer is eating this stuff, then we people are eating the GMO corn and soy and the meat. And in addition, there's sodium nitrates and nitrites that are cancer-causing. They're put into it's a red coloring chemical that's added to all the processed meats like bacon, hot dogs, sausage, jerky, ham, luncheon meats, and that type of meat. Nitrates are strongly linked to brain tumors, pancreatic, and colon cancers. In fact, at one point in time, the USDA tried to ban nitrates from the food supply, but they were outmaneuvered by the meat industry several years ago. So we're still contending with the nitrates in our meats. But, however, you can buy some, like uncured bacon that does not have the nitrates in it. And then a few months ago, we had the issue of pink slime that came up. Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. Pink slime is basically where they took the scraps that were left over from the meat processing. And, of course, they're loaded with bacteria, and the government said, well, you've got to treat it with ammonia, and that's how pink slime came into existence. And I remember seeing some hamburger meat in the stores that was really the color of like calamine lotion. It was really a light pink, and I thought to myself, that looks weird. And at the time I didn't know about it, but then since then, and then I look back upon it, I thought, maybe they just added fat to it, but no. Well, they might have added more fat, but they also treated it with ammonia, and it was called pink slime.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't see that firsthand, but that's horrible. Let's talk about your book, Smart Eating Made Simple. Tell us about it.
It came about because I had a bout with my health, and I just wanted to write and tell especially my family about it. And I felt like I was sleeping around the clock. I had thyroid problems leading to my thyroid being zapped with radioactive iodine, and I was dragging one leg with trips to the doctor never seeming to end.
Wow.
So over a period of 10 years, and after 2 knee replacements, I felt really tired, and I was hanging on the wall while I was walking, and every movement was painful. I was on a downhill slide for sure. Then I began searching for a new way of eating, and so after I had 80% improvement, I never looked back. I just get up from a chair easily and walk without pain, and so I felt so much better, and I just wanted to tell my family about my accomplishment, and this inspired me to write the book, Smart Eating Made Simple.
In your book, you talk a little bit about the scientific understandings of plant nutrients. How much time or research did you look into that scientific understanding? Yes, it takes a lot of research, and being a nutritionist, that's what I really love. That's the part of the book I really liked, was doing the research on the macronutrients, which are vitamins, that's the micronutrients, vitamin, minerals, antioxidants. But I also did research on the macronutrients, which are the carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and You have a blog as well? Yes, I do. That's janeibbetson.authorexpress.com. And I just want to note that Express has no E. It's authors and the letter X. Press.com. Right. So make sure it's easy for listeners to find. And I want to ask you about Andrew, is it Whitley, who wrote the foreword in your book? Yes, He's from Great Britain. Mm-hmm. And he wrote the foreword for me. He wrote the book Bread Matters. And he is an artisan baker and teacher, co-founder of the Real Bread campaign in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And he willingly wrote the foreword for my book. That's great. And that leads me into breads a little. I wanted to ask you a little bit about grain and wheat breads. Are they really okay for us? I've heard a lot of controversy over that lately, about grains and wheats, and that's something that was introduced to the human diet, at a later time, and is not the greatest thing for us. Yeah, well, they do contain a lot of additives. Breads contain sugar. I'll just start with some of the additives here, but sugar is one of them. Maybe there's 3 ways, if you look at the ingredients, 3 ways that you'll find sugar in bread. There might be high fructose corn syrup, there might be sugar, there might be dextrose, which is another form of sugar, there might be evaporated cane juice, and there might be honey that's listed. And then there's different kinds of grains that can be put into bread, like wheat. It's different as compared to the 1950s and the 1960s. Back in those days, the wheat was higher in protein. Nowadays, the wheat is more starchy and it has less protein, and because this makes a more beautiful loaf of bread. There's just a lot of pros and cons about eating bread. Like my husband, he's a slender man, and he can eat bread any day and not gain any weight. But myself, I have to really watch it. The other day, we had a Reuben sandwich, and I thought to myself, this is bad for me because I will just gain weight. And sure enough, I did. So I have to really watch it. It just depends on the person and how it affects their body. Nowadays, we just don't know everything about nutrition, and nutrition is fairly new. Vitamins and minerals, a lot of these things weren't discovered until the early 1900s. So we're still learning. And where can we find your book online, Jane? My book is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and Author House. All right. And your blog address one more time? janeibbetson.authorexpress.com. All right, great. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show, sharing all this great information with us about the foods that we're eating or should be eating. Okay, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. All right, I can vouch for the foods we eat having a negative or positive effects on the way we feel. I've long been into health and nutrition. If you're not happy with the way you look or feel, look at your diet. Exercise is important, but you got to fill the tank with the right fuel. Keep healthy, keep fit, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.